Hi, and welcome to my video on fitting and using my Mark V version of my mask. Now, I have a particular way that I usually open these videos, and I'm going to break with standard practice now because there's something incredibly important that anyone who receives one of these things must do immediately. Okay, so if you've received a box and you have a pre-assembled Mark V in it, the most important thing you can do with it right now, don't take it out and like put it on your face, don't take it out and show it and marvel at it, handle it, show it. The most important thing you can do right now is take this thing and immediately sanitize it, okay? So take it to the sink, wash your hands, spray this thing with a household bleach cleaner, okay? The CDC has lists of household bleach cleaners that are appropriate for deactivating the virus. Spray this down thoroughly, everything that's in here, with a bleach cleaner. Let it sit for 5 to 15 minutes, give the bleach time to work, and then rinse it off, and then wash your hands again. And then you can take it out and play with it and marvel at it and move on to the other steps in this video. But you absolutely must assume that this thing is coming to you infected, and you must sanitize it coming out of the box. Now, understand, in my previous video, which was for 3D printers and makers who were assembling this thing and sending it off to other people, the most important thing that I left them with, the last step, was that they needed to sanitize this before they put it in the box. Okay, but you should not assume that they actually did that. You should assume that they didn't, and you should assume this thing is infected. Now, the other thing I told them to do is I told them to send this thing snail mail, send it ground, send it, so that it sits in here for at least 2 to 3 days in transit. That next day air might actually be a little less safe, because 2 to 3 days is about the right time, amount of time for the virus to sort of deactivate itself. And so there's sort of a second layer of protection, hopefully, in that this thing probably took about 2 to 3 days to get to you. But you shouldn't trust that either. And again, you need to take this and sanitize it immediately and wash your hands afterwards and just make sure that this thing is free of virus before you start messing with it. So I'm going to take this and go sanitize it right now. Now, before we go any deeper, I just want to get 2 things out of the way up front. Number one, if you have not watched the intro video to this video series, you should really stop right now and go watch it. It introduces the reasons why I felt I needed to redesign the NanoHack mask and my design goals, and it gives you a good context to understand what you should and shouldn't expect of this mask, and it's important, so you should watch it. The second thing is I'm going to get this disclaimer out of the way because it's important. Okay? I am not a scientist, I am not a medical professional, and I am not an engineer, and I don't actually know if any of the designs or ideas that I'm presenting here are actually functional, or whether in the worst case they might actually be dangerous. But I'm providing them anyway in this emergency situation because we don't really have access to the things that we would need, and it's the best I can do. This is the assembled mask body that I have just sanitized. I have never actually put this up to my face. I sort of did it off of measurements, which is the same way that yours should come to you, is sort of pre-assembled and ready to go, but fit basically just by measurements. The one measurement that I use to do this is a measurement from the tip of my nose to the bottom of my chin. I sort of did it in 3 states, once with my mouth closed, once with my mouth fully open, and once with my mouth just sort of half open, like in speaking, right? And then when I built this, I used those measurements to sort of get this fold on the chin cup right and make sure that the bottom of this gasket was hopefully in the right place. And that's how it should come to you. Other things of note, these 3 sort of flaps up here at the top, the nose flap and then the 2 sort of eye socket flaps will not be sort of bent down into the right position for you because that's what we're going to do here. It's going to be part of the fitting process. They should have been left mostly alone for you. Flip it around to the back here, you will probably immediately notice that this thing will never fit because it's probably got these big loops of material down here by the chin that are sort of being, they are kind of like under pressure and sort of swooped in here. The first part of the fit process is going to be really sort of getting the chin area right, okay? And so for comparison, here is a completed Mark IV, okay? And you'll see that the actual sort of chin area on this one is much wider, and the reason is because I've actually sort of put a cut in here and trimmed it out and used some thermoforming to sort of open up the chin so that it so that it fits, and then I was able to move into the rest of the mask. See, the eye sockets are bent in, the nose flap is bent in, and they're actually being used to sort of press the gasket up against my face. Chances are you'll end up doing something very similar yourself. Okay, so that's what we're going to eventually get to. Now, how are we going to do that? We're going to do it with the simplest of possible tools. All right, so let's talk about this thing and the cuts that we're going to make in here. So depending on your size and how this works, the folds may be a little more severe or a little less severe, but chances are you do have these loops here, and these loops are definitely going to get in the way of putting your chin into this. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do, now keep in mind, this material is, it's really easy to cut it, and it's really harder to seam it back together. Okay, so you want to make multiple attempts at smaller, finer cuts and just sort of progressively work into a fit rather than make one big cut all at once if you can, because putting it back together is difficult. It's technically possible. I use a soldering iron when I really need to seam this stuff together, but I'm also going by the theory that you don't really have a temperature controlled soldering iron. So we're going to do this more cautiously, and I'm not going to necessarily go into the specifics of how to do that. So the thing to do is to identify here where the most tension exists that's pushing this flap in, and cut straight into it. Now you could go all the way down here to like the base of the to the base of the actual gasket, but we're not going to do that at first. We're going to try to be a little more conservative than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to basically the top of these loops here. I'll do this upside down and look at the camera while I do it so I make sure that you can see. And I'm going to go about just halfway down, just straight down halfway down, and make that cut halfway down the length. Okay, and it cuts pretty easy. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Let's see if I can get that in camera for you. Again, sort of just halfway down at the apex of that loop. Okay. And now I'm just going to confirm that just by now pushing this stuff that if I can sort of widen out a little bit, right? And it's going to want to go back to where it was, and that's fine. But I just want to confirm that, if I release the tension, that this cup will get wider. And then also the other half of it will sort of flow on top, right? And if that may be all you need, if the way yours came, it was actually a little bit wider, halfway may be all you need, and you can try now bringing it up to your face and seeing if it works. But this is way too shallow for me. It's I can just feel that I'm not getting deep enough into the gasket to actually seal. Okay, you may at this point discover that the mask is actually folded in too much, and that's also not right. And you may, after watching this video, decide that the next thing you want to do when you try it is you might want to actually thermoform a little bit at this point before you decide if you need to cut any deeper. In my case, I'm certain I need to cut deeper. So I'm going to go back to those two cuts, and I'm going to make them a little bit deeper. I'm just going to line up my scissor. Sorry. I will get used to this by the end of the video. I'm going to line up my scissor and make a deeper cut than I did before. I'm going to go to the other side, line up the scissor to where it was, and make a deeper cut. Okay, and then take a look and try to force those things out. See that they're going out about as far as I could want. I'm going to need to do some, they want to keep folding back, but that they can go as far as I need them to go, and that they're not really pulling on anything when I do that. And then I'm going to grab the other two and fold them down and see that, yes, when they fold on top of here, first of all, they sort of overlap each other quite a bit, which is going to be good because that'll sort of make a seal. And now I'm going to put this up to my face as it is and see that, that's going to work. I just need them to sort of naturally fall into that position, which right now they're not going to do. But that allows me to sort of put this thing up to my face and just sort of see how the rest of this thing fits. Here we are. I am sort of pinning these things back manually with my hands, and I'm going to put it up onto my face and sort of release and switch over, just putting some positive pressure on the front of the mask and breathe in and out and sort of, see where the air is going. If you need to, you can cover these up And in my case, immediately, I actually have a pretty good seal. When I do this, the entire chin feels sealed. There's nothing coming in and out of the chin, and the place that it's starting to leak is now up here by the eye bridge. Okay? And the entire cheek area is automatically sealing for me, which is good. Right? And so this tells me where I need to go next. All right, so I want to start off right here with a bit of a mea culpa. I am wearing a different shirt. It is a different day. I was going to thermoform this thing using what I consider sort of the lowest common denominator method, which is hot water, which I usually use this measuring cup in a bowl and sort of pour the water on here. And if you want to see how that's done, you can go and watch my Mark II build video, which has a whole section on thermoforming with just using this and hot water in a bowl. It works fine. So if you want to see that technique, that's where you can go to see it. But I'm not going to do this mask that way, and there is a very specific reason for that. I started actually trying to do that, and it wouldn't actually get hot enough to bend. And there's a very good reason for that. There's two good reasons for it. First of all, the reason why I actually started doing this method with the measuring cup is because I kind of want to get I didn't want to have to shoot this like over my stove or right next to my hot water heater. So I started transferring the hot water into the cup, and then I brought the cup over and I used the cup over by the bowl, sort of in my little shooting environment. And that worked fine in previous videos because those masks were printed out of a particular type of plastic known as PLA, which stands for polylactic acid. PLA plastic is the most common plastic that 3D printers use these days. It's the most widely distributed and one of the easiest to print. It has sort of two issues with it if I had compared to other plastics that you can 3D print, which is number one, it's more brittle and less bendy than other plastics. And two, it has sort of a lower melting temperature, but also a lower glassing temperature. All right, and glassing temperature is actually really sort of what we care about here. It's where it actually gets sort of flexible and glassy as opposed to just full-on melting. If it was full-on melting, it would fall apart and droop all over the place. This mask, I moved on to printing in a different plastic. I printed this in PETG, and PET stands for polyethylene terephthalate, which is a mouthful. And why I need this thing to remember it, because that one's pretty crazy. And the G is glycol, it's a glycol additive. PETG plastic is bendier, it's stronger, and it's less likely to shatter, but it also has a higher melting point, which we don't care about here, but also has a higher glassing point temperature, okay? Now, that glass point temperature is well below the temperature of boiling water, which is 100 degrees centigrade. So you can actually still thermoform this thing with hot water. It just needs to be really hot water. And the process that I was going through, where I was sort of shoveling the water, in this glass over here and trying to use it over the next few minutes, it was actually losing enough heat that it really wasn't effectively melting this stuff, which is why I sort of stopped recording and decided to do something a little different, okay? But I can confirm from you, because I did actually give it a shot. I did take this over to the hot water heater and actually just tried pouring hot water from the hot water heater directly on here, and it does actually melt it. It does get bendy. So it can be done. It's just probably easier for you if you do it sort of with a electric tea kettle like sitting right there, or if you're heating the water on the stove, if you do it right next to the stove and then put the thing right back on the stove when you're done with it. Or if you're doing it at a hot water heater, that you bring a bowl over and do it right by the hot water heater, it'll still work. But for this video, I'm going to do something a little different, which is I'm going to use the second lowest common denominator thing, which is a hairdryer. Now, if you watched earlier videos, you may note that I had said I don't own a hairdryer, and I didn't. One of the reasons why it's a completely different day and I'm in a different shirt is because it's been a couple of days, because I had to order a hairdryer so I could actually demonstrate the second most likely sort of lowest common denominator way to actually thermoform one of these. Okay. Now, I would just point out that a hairdryer may be a little bit more of an object of privilege than you might think. Pretty much everyone can sort of find a way to boil water, but not everybody actually can get their hands on a hairdryer, as pointed out by the intellectual luminary Mel Brooks in his seminal work, Spaceballs. Okay. But I'm going to take advantage of my privilege here for a minute and show you guys how this actually works. Okay, and I have tested this out and it does function. So my hair dryer, my brand new hair dryer, I have to set it to the high setting in order to get it to sort of get enough heat to really melt this thing. And I keep it right now on low speed because I figure, you know, less air coming out of this thing, you know, at a high temperature is going to be more concentrated. And I am using this little convenient diffuser attachment, which sort of helps me concentrate the heat in the right area. Though I'd point out the heater is actually in the end here, and this is actually forcing me to stay about 1.5 inches away. So, you know, it's got advantage. It sort of puts out a nice hot straight line of heat, but it also is keeping things a little further away from the heating element than it would otherwise. I'm also going to be very careful not to point this at the camera when I use it. So, all right, back to what we were getting at, which is actually thermoforming this thing. So I haven't done anything else to it since then. We're still in the state where I've got these 2 cuts in the bottom of the chin, and I kind of want to just start trying to bend these nose flaps in. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this on and try to get this whole upper area to temperature. And then I'm just going to try to bend these nose parts that go over the eye sockets in. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the nose flap here in the middle immediately. I just want to get a good starting point where these things are really sort of pressing in on the TPU and trying to mold to my nose just as a start, okay? I just want to get through a few of these bends because I'm going to show you how this is a back and forth process. All right, let's see, that's enough to get it bending a bit. You can see I'm just applying some pressure, and it's giving and it's holding in place, which is telling me I'm sort of in range. But I didn't get quite as hot as I'd like it, so. Alright, I saw it move, which means, yeah, there we go. Alright, now you see how I'm actually pushing that wing in to the point that it's actually pressing on the TPU. Alright, sorry, the TPU is the material that the gasket's made out of, the flexible stuff. Alright, and I'm pushing it in probably further than it needs to go. And I'm pushing it in along the whole seam. I'm just bending the whole thing in, and it's also pushing a little bit on there. And that's good for a start. I'm just gonna do, it's probably not right, but I wanna get both sides in, and then I'll test fit it and see where it needs to go. I'm doing this quickly before it comes back down. Again, the same thing, I'm just pushing in across the whole thing. And it's coming in and it's sort of pinching in on that gasket. You'll see the nose cup is now significantly thinner because these things are both pushing in on the sides here. And again, I'm trying to make sure it's not just on the side here. I'm going down the whole, making the whole fold down there. All right, give this a moment and it'll harden back up. All right, and so there you go, two folds already. And let's just see how that sort of works. Again, I'm gonna fold back these bottom parts first and force them back. Now it's still a bit warm, I can feel it. And that's okay, it's not burning me, it's not quite that hot. And this is allowing me to sort of see how it works. And we're gonna do the same thing that we did before. I'm gonna Alright, so I'm taking stock of where it's actually coming out. Now, what's actually really impressive about this is that those two like strong bends in, maybe I'm just getting used to this, have really sort of hit this treble area. This is usually the hardest area to really get to seal up. They've hit it like nearly perfectly. And so really with these two adjustments alone, I've actually sort of gotten a perfect thing fit here. The place it's actually now starting to come out is over here on the cheek on the left side. Let's just double check that. Yeah, and it actually takes quite a bit of force, quite a bit of suction or blow to actually even get it to blow out, which means this fit is nearly perfect now. Mostly because I've just gotten good at this stuff. You will probably have a little bit more back and forth to go. You may have to fold these parts in and out a bit, and you may need to fold them back. One piece of advice I would give you is make sure that these things go in a little bit further than you think they need to. Remember, this particular plastic is very flexible. You can sort of see it bending here. It it gives quite a bit, right? And so it would be better if it was pushing a little too much and your nose was actually bending it back out, because that means that the gasket is actually sandwiched in the middle there. That's actually a good thing, okay? So before I go into sort of my final steps on this, to just sort of or go into finishing steps as opposed to sort of gross fit steps, I just want to show you a couple examples of some designs I did with have some other cuts in them that might help you get a better idea of where you might want to do something. So this is a prototype mask. You'll see it's very similar to it's got that wider, much wider gasket. But this one I actually printed a whole bunch of extra cuts into it originally, and then I also actually did some other stuff to it. So you'll see though that it has those big wide cuts on the bottom here, right? And those are the same as what we just did. In fact, the fact that these are so easy to do with the scissor is why I stopped printing them in, because you can just do that yourself. But this one also has little cuts along the cheek here, right, which turns these into little flaps and allows them to fan out a little bit more and press up a little closer to the face. Same thing on the other side, same thing, little flaps, because we put cuts halfway down, and so they become little flaps that fan out. It also had printed into it, it actually has little cuts right here along this bend, and I got rid of these in this one because I find that the solid one probably works a little better. But some people may still need to sort of make some shallow cuts in here. In fact, this one, the cuts that were printed in were originally all the way down to the bottom here. And what I've actually done on this particular mask is I've actually closed those up halfway. Okay, and the fact that I needed to close these up halfway is actually the thing that sort of clued me into the idea that maybe I should actually print it out without any cuts and then only put cuts in, to the extent that they're necessary. So this thing actually has a really good, before we go into that, the last ones are these cuts along the nose cap, which hopefully you can see, which again, they're only like a third or a quarter of the way down. They're enough to sort of allow my nose to sort of fan this out, and it lets me get deeper into it. And this thing actually fits pretty well. It's a pretty good fit. My face definitely can get deeper into it than on some other masks. But this was a middle step, but it shows you, all the cuts you can do to try to allow your face to get really deep in here. Okay, so hopefully some good ideas from this if you're having trouble fitting and bending isn't quite doing enough for you. Okay, now another one to take a look at here is this. This is a Mark IV design. Okay, so it's a different style gasket. You'll see the gasket is much smaller on the Mark IV than it is on the Mark V because it's printed, sort of into an ideal shape, or what I thought was an ideal shape. It probably still is. So you'll notice it has similar cuts down here at the chin, the same ones that we've been doing, pre-printed into it, but it has a larger chin area. Okay, and it actually hooks around a little bit more. And that's why ultimately, this works pretty well because the cheeks are really much easier to fit than the chin area. I needed to nonetheless, have more material around the chin. And you may find that trimming this thing around the cheeks is perfectly fine for you. I haven't found a need to do it, but you can actually just trim the whole thing shorter around the cheeks if you need to, if they're just too much. You can leave the chin longer. That's sort of what this says. And this one had breaks built into it again around the nose area here, which I have since decided is one of the last kind of cuts that you would want to make. But it also had these extra tabs up here to try to help seal up around the nose, which is again, sort of, this thing is just wide around the whole thing. But again, if you really need to, you can sort of cut down under the eyes and leave tabs closer to your nose. And then the nose cup is not as large as it is on the Mark V, but the nose cup is larger than the rest of the gasket on this. Right, and this may give you some better ideas as far as like how you might want to trim this thing down once you've got it working. And it's got some nice rounded edges in some areas. And it's something to think about as far as what you might want to do to try to fit this thing better. All right, so with that out of the way, and also keep in mind, you can now, when it comes to this thing, you can do more than just bend these parts in. You can actually reshape the entire chin if you need to, which I'm probably about to do a little bit. You could also melt the front or glass the front and bend the whole thing in or bend it back out if you're having that kind of problem. This one is not doing that to me right now. All right, so fit and finish. For the moment, I don't feel like I really need to. One of the last things I'll do just for looks is I'll probably bend this little nose thing back in, but right now it's not really a problem. I suspect I may need to go and touch these up once I do some other things. But the big thing I want to do right now is I want to try to get this chin in a way where it fits right now, but I want to get it into a way where it actually falls into the final shape as opposed to me having to like pull things out of the way in order to put it on my face. And so what I'm going to seek to do here is a few things. I will probably end up trimming some of these plastic bits away just to make them more rounded and sort of fall over each other better. But the first thing I want to try to do is really loosen up the base plastic that's holding this gasket in place on the bottom of the chin so that I can get the chin to naturally be, automatically be a bit wider when it starts. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the whole area on the inside and the outside, and then I'm going to try to sort of press it into the right shape. Let's go. Okay, so I've just gone and gotten a glove. This is just a workman's glove. It's not really meant to be temperature resistant, but it's going to help me a little bit. What I was saying before is I'm having a little trouble getting the heat from this diffuser to melt a wide area that I'm looking to melt. So what I'm going to try doing is I'm going to try pulling this off. Usually once you will. All right, there we go. And that's going to let me get the plastic sort of closer to this heater, which should help me melt some of the bigger areas that I'm having trouble with. And because I'm really going to try to get this thing in close, I'm going with a glove. Okay, so I've gotten the chin to sort of open up a little bit. Enough that it likes to sort of, it's at least underneath the other wings, so that I've got a chance of it actually like sitting correctly on its own. But I kind of want to help it slide a little bit underneath. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my scissors, let's see if I can get this in camera. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to round off this little sort of corner here. Which will help it hopefully slide a little bit underneath the other piece. So the rounded one is now sort of same size, just rounded, right? And the one that I haven't done yet is still square. And now that one is pretty well rounded as well, right? And rounding those two means that it's going to be a little bit easier for the gasket that's sort of sitting on top of them to slide over them, like so. Which makes it easier to put the mask on. And that is damn near perfect for the seal. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a very small rounding of these corners on the opposite side. Not much, because I like where they're sitting right now. And that's actually probably pretty good. So you see now they naturally cover each other pretty well. I could probably loosen this up a little bit more and see if we can get a little bit deeper, but it's actually pretty good. And the only thing really left to do on this mask is I'm just going to fold this little nose piece in. So, alright, I can feel it pinching it on my nose pretty significantly actually. All right, and I can feel I have somehow managed to open up a small leak here. Alright, that's pretty solid. There we go. Alright, so this is pretty much as good as it's going to get. You can consider making some changes to it later. You know, there's nothing that we're going to do to this at this stage or really going forward that's going to make this not thermoformable and not cuttable any further. So if you want to take the mask out a few times and use it, and then you find there's a certain area that's opening up that needs adjustment, you can always make adjustment later. But that's sort of how you do it. That's the basics of taking one of these things that comes in, you know, sort of unusable, and fit it to your face to the point that that you can use it. Now that we've got the mask fit and with a good seal, it's time to move into making filters. Now your kit should have come hopefully with a bunch of filter rings. I have them here separated into bags for 1-ply and 2-ply. And what that means is one for fitting sort of 1-ply of cotton material, average size cotton material, versus one that's for sort of fitting 2-ply of some sort of average size cotton material. But you can use other filter materials as well. Now, before I get into how to make those, I want to talk about filter materials. Now, I have not to this point recommended, like truly recommended, that people actually send any particular filter material with these masks. And the main reason is because there's a lot of yelling and recriminating, and also sort of, you know, very hasty research and also a lot of false assertions being made about all kinds of different filter materials at this point in time. And given that, and given, quite frankly, how much this mask has gone into sort of separating the actual mask design from its actual filter material, I don't think I really want to get too deep into that, except to say this is real peer-reviewed scientific research. Okay, this is a research paper from Anna Davies et al. I will provide the full citation so you can take a look at it. This is real peer-reviewed science on filter materials, and I really think, given all the misinformation going around, that sticking to real peer-reviewed materials as far as these decisions is a pretty safe thing to do and an appropriate thing to do. Okay, and so I just want to point out some very specific things about this paper. The paper is sort of in two halves. Okay, the first half is just a pure sort of apparatus-based measurement of the efficacy of certain household filter materials up against a control material. And the control they use is a surgical mask. Surgical masks are made from mostly non-woven polypropylene, and that's an electrostatic filter, and that's a different kind of filter than what most of the things on the lists in here of what they tested. But it's a good control. And they used two different types of sort of microbes to test the efficacy. They have sort of two broad sizes that are somewhat applicable here. One is a smaller bacteria. The other is an average size virus. The average size virus is supposedly closer in range to COVID. It also happens to be in the micron range that's the hardest to filter. So that's sort of the better set of numbers to use here. That's the sort of second set of numbers here. But the third set of numbers on here is also really important as well. Okay, and these are what's labeled pressure drop across the fabric. In other words, the resistance the fabric puts up to breathing through it. Okay, and just to give some examples here, one thing that works really, really well is a tea towel. It's presumably a cotton tea towel, but if you actually take a look at how hard it is, it's pressure drop across the surface, you see it's nearly impossible to breathe through it. Okay, and our mask, and really any mask, you're sort of balancing the efficacy of the filter versus the resistance, because if the resistance is too high on the filter, then the air is just going to go out the side of the mask. No matter how good the seal is, at some point you will blow through the seal if you offer up too much resistance to going through the filter. So a tea towel probably is not actually a really good choice for most masks. Anyhow, Going through down through this list, the two that jump out to me, that really jump out to most people, and for that matter jump out to the CDC, because the CDC recommends using masks made out of them, is 100% cotton t-shirt material, and then there's also a section here for the cotton mix, which I assume is a cotton blend. Right, and so you should read this. You should read other materials that are actually like peer-reviewed as well, but I would stay away. Now, the other thing that's in here, by the way, is a vacuum bag. And there's also a lot of misinformation surrounding vacuum bags. I really don't want to get into that here. The one thing I will point out is that most modern vacuum bags are made from the same non-woven polypropylene layers that the actual surgical mask is made out of, which would be why it actually performs very well in here, is because it also is an electrostatic filter. But electrostatic filters are tricky. They're hard to clean. They're hard to and the cottons and the cotton blends are less tricky. They're not electrostatic in nature. And they are much easier to clean. And so that's why I'm going to, in this video, show you how to make cotton and cotton blend filters out of this. Although, if you want to get experimental, you can use whatever filter material you think is appropriate. I just suggest peer-reviewed material, please. Okay, so here I have two materials that we're going to use to make some filters here. I'm going to set this aside for the moment. This white material here is just 100% cotton from 100% cotton t-shirt. I've already used it to make quite a few filters, and I'm just going to use it here to show you how to make a one-ply filter. So I'm just going to, out of my one-ply bag here, I'm going to pull an inner ring and an outer ring. And those look good. Okay, now the inner ring, you may see, has these little sort of these little parapet sort of tops to it. Those are designed to sort of when the whole filter pushes to the front of the filter cylinder, it keeps the filter cylinder from completely blocking the inlets, and that's why they're on there. You flip those, for doing this, you just flip those face down, because we're gonna put the filter material on from the back. And then the smaller ring is just going to capture the material and press fit around the side. Okay, so the basic idea here is that we're just going to capture by putting it on top and then pressing the ring around. But there is an important thing to know from the research paper. Okay? If you read the research paper, and this is why I told you to read the whole thing, because there are details, and details are important. When they put these things in little rings, which they did pretty much like this, and then put them to an instrument and just measured what the material is doing, separate from whether it was made into a mask or not. They made it a point to point out that they didn't stretch the material, because if you stretch the material, you can actually see the little holes in the weave open up. And they made sure that when they put these things in there that they were not stretched, that they had a little bit of slack in them so that the material wasn't being pulled apart. And so what that means for us when we put this in here is it helps to put a little bit of slack in the middle here. So I'm just pressing it in, so that when we actually capture it with the ring, I'm just going to put that back in, we don't accidentally stretch the material too tight. If it ends up like a trampoline, then we've stretched it, and we have to redo it again. In this case, I've got a little bit of slack left in there, and I've pressed the ring over the top, and we're all good. So all I'm really going to do here now is just come in with the scissors and trim out the excess. All right, and there we go. That is one filter ring, or one filter, good to go. If you have two filter cylinders, you'll need at least two filters to start using it. They should be balanced. They should be the same makeup. Otherwise, you'll end up using one if they have different resistances. But anyway, that's how you make a single one. Now, as I was saying earlier, cleaning this is easy because this plastic is completely fine with bleach. It's completely resistant to bleach. And this cotton, which was bleached before I put it on here, can also be bleached again. And when I clean these cotton ones, I just use bleach. I let it sit on there for 5 to 15 minutes, and then I rinse it out, and it's good to go. Almost all research shows that that cotton, if you just bleach it over and over again, is a really good filter material. It doesn't break down, and it's not because it's not electrostatic. in nature, so it doesn't have those kinds of problems. All right, so that's one. But I also want to show you how to make a 2-ply, just in case you feel like you want to, or you want to mix materials or some such. So I'm going to pull out a 2-ply ring set here. Okay, this is almost identical. The only real difference is the inner ring is actually a little bit smaller, so there's a little bit more of a gap between these two. Okay, it's very hard to actually see it, but it is actually meant for that. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take it and put it with the little standoffs pointing down, and this time I'm going to make a combo filter here between my my poly blend material and my cotton blend and my cotton. Okay, because I'm going to sort of hedge my bets and say I want to try to get the slightly better performance of the cotton blend, but I'm still a little iffy on it, so I want to back it with cotton, so at the worst case it's at least as good as a cotton filter. All right, now I'm just making sure to put a whole bunch of slack into the center there before I get this outer ring and try to capture it, because neither one of these things do I want them stretching very much. All right, and I'm just going to press down, and it's tight, but it works, and they're both, just check both sides. They're both got plenty of slack in there, so neither one of them is stretched. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the scissor and just cut around and free them both. All right, just cut away any little excess around the edge that I think will be a problem. There you go. That's a 2-ply filter. And similarly, there's nothing about this Kali blend that isn't bleachable. So just like the other one, I would just sort of clean this on a regular basis just by spraying bleach on it, letting it sit for 15 minutes, and then rinsing out the bleach. Works fine. Okay. So again, the most important part of this, and I'm really not necessarily recommending these two materials, except to say that this research material supports these two materials as being pretty effective. And there's a reason why the CDC is recommending cotton, and really probably one of the reasons why the CDC is recommending it is this research paper. You can do other materials. I'm not going to step into the problem of trying to recommend to you other materials. I will tell you I have been messing around with other materials, and I use other materials in mine. But that is a subject that you're going to have to go into with other people and in another way. But as you might imagine, any material that you can sort of put into one of these rings, it'll filter, and that's one of the nice things about this mask is it separates sort of the filter from the mask design and getting a seal. All right, now that we've put together some filters and we finished fitting our mask, we're pretty much ready for final assembly and some basic usage instructions for this thing. Okay, so first let's just go into the assembly. So here I have all the parts. I've just tied these two little rubber bands into the loops on the mask. Okay, and I've got my mask adjuster here as well. Okay, I've got my two caps. I've got two filters that I've assembled, and I have two O-rings. And I realize they're not technically O-rings, but it's what I call them anyway. So let's just assemble the two cylinders for usage. Okay, so I'm going to take a filter, and remember we've got these little offsets on here, and we want those to be towards the front of the cylinder of the cap. So we just insert it right here. All right, then we grab one of the rings, slide it right in, and then we're just going to screw it into the mask. And when it's fit in there correctly, it'll actually tighten up at just the very end because it's compressing the ring. Okay, since I've got two cylinders here, I'm just going to put together a second one. Again, filter, offsets up front. Okay, take the ring, lay it in there, and then just screw it into the cylinder. And when it's in correctly, it'll tighten up just at the very end. There we go. Okay, so now we've got our filter ring set in place. And then every time you put it on, you usually just have to put this mask adjuster on. It's fine. You'll get used to it. And that's about the right size for me. When I put this thing on, my glasses make it a little more complex than it necessarily needs to be, but it's still fine. So. All right.
There you go. Now, when you're testing this thing out, you can put your hands in front of the cylinders here. And you'll be able to confirm that your hot breath is actually coming in and out of the cylinders because you'll be able to feel the heat.
However, when you're actually out in the wild with this mask, I think it's a very bad idea to put your hands in front of the cylinders like that and check it on a regular basis, because theoretically you'll have virus captured in the filter material, and when you exhale, it'll sort of blow out of the mask and maybe onto your hand. So in the wild, I would not do that kind of, holding your hand in front and testing it. But in a controlled environment where you're just testing out, that's a great way just to confirm that it's really doing what it should be doing, right? And with that, the mask is done, it's assembled, and it's tested. And so we get to the just questions about daily usage, all right? And the very first thing I told you to do with this thing when it came into your home in pieces was to sanitize it, and really that's the most important thing about this. Keep using this thing going forward. I can't give you an official recommendation on how often to sanitize this mask because I don't actually know. I can only tell you what I do, which is that I sanitize it at least once a day. If I don't use it for a day, then I won't sanitize it that day. But if I'm using it during the day, I will sanitize it at least once a day. And we do that the same way we did when it came in, which is I spray it down with bleach and water. Bleach, let it sit for 5 to 15 minutes with the bleach, and then rinse it off with the water. Okay? But there is one added caveat here that I need to point out. I said I wasn't going to get deep into filter materials, and I really don't want to. But there is one really important thing here that might catch you that I think I need to point out. Right. So I have this thing loaded up with cotton blend fabric material right now, and as I said during the filter section, this stuff is bleachable. And when I'm using cotton or cotton blend on here, I will just spray this down with bleach along with the rest of the mask and then rinse it out with water along with the rest of the mask, and that is absolutely fine. However, and the other thing I will do with it is I actually have a small jar of isopropyl alcohol, and sometimes I will take this and just drop it in the IPA on the isopropyl for like 5 minutes and then fish it out and then rinse it off, and that works just as well when it's cotton. Okay. The caveat here, if you are messing around with other filter materials in here, okay, and you put an electrostatic filter material in here, electrostatic filter materials will lose their electrostatic charge under a lot of sort of cleaning solution conditions. And the ones that I know for certain, and not just because people have been saying it, but because I've found peer-reviewed scientific material that explains it and proves it. If you put electrostatic filter material in isopropyl, it'll lose its charge almost completely immediately. And really any sort of ionized material in water, because that's what water does. Water pulls salts apart and leaves free-floating radicals, ions. And that includes bleach. Okay, so bleach gets pulled into its two constituent parts and floats around in the water. When those will also discharge electrostatic filter materials. So if you are sanitizing your mask and you're using a filter material that's actually electrostatic rather than that is not cotton but is actually electrostatic in nature, you need to be careful to, at the very least, remove the filter before you spray down the rest of the mask with bleach and water to sanitize it, because if that bleach ends up in those types of filters, it could be a serious problem, and it's a microscopic issue that you cannot detect without proper equipment. Okay. How do you actually sanitize filters that are electrostatic in nature? I'm not going to get into that here. I'm just not. So keep in mind, again, if you're using cotton or cotton blends, you can bleach them along with the rest of the mask. If you're using electrostatic materials, be careful. Like, yes, you need to sanitize the rest of the mask, and bleach and water is a good way to do it. Be careful you don't ruin your electrostatic filter with that bleach at the same time. The good news is the mask allows you to completely take out the filter separate from the rest of the mask, so that's completely doable. Just be careful about it. Okay? So with that, we're pretty much done here. I just want to leave you with my usual disclaimer because it's important, and I feel it's important to be responsible. I am not a scientist, I am not a medical professional, and I am not an engineer. And I don't know for certain if these designs that I'm providing, the information that I'm providing, are actually functional, or in the worst case, they might even be dangerous. Okay, but I am providing them in this emergency situation anyway because I'm trying to provide you the best information that I have and trying to be helpful. Okay, and so with that, thanks for watching the video. I hope this helps someone. Have a great day.